Welcome to the International TEFL Training Program by the Language Train Incorporated. In this section, we will be talking about many things that have to do with classroom management. The first section we will talk about, or the first module rather, is about the good teacher. What it takes to be a good teacher. Modules to come after this are going to be about successful classroom environment, dealing with methods, mistakes, and feedback. In that, we'll talk about the various methodologies that we use in teaching. Classroom Management Module 4, we will talk about classroom management basics, some basics of classroom management beyond the first 3 modules. And the 5th is a very important module where we will be talking about lesson planning. And in the final module for this section, we'll be talking about teacher evaluations, where I will first introduce you to the rubric. Rubrics are what we use at Language Train Incorporated to evaluate our teachers, but we'll cover many other teacher evaluation methods in that module. So let's get to it with this particular module.
What do you think makes a good teacher?
I think someone who's firm but fair, and like someone who's got a sense of humour as well, because if you're willing to have a laugh with your students, then like you're going to earn their respect, so they're more likely to listen to what you say.
They have to be kind of like get you involved in the subject, because if it's just like do this, do that, and they don't like talk to you as like either an individual or like on a personal basis, it's kind of just like they're talking to you, not with you. And they have to get you involved in the subject for you to actually understand it and help you understand it. So if they're more like kind of like over the top or like a bit enthusiastic about their subject, it kind of makes you think, oh, they do it, so I'm going to do it as well. So it kind of makes you more happy to do it.
They need to be not too strict. They still need to be friendly, but they need to be able to control the class and see when like an individual is talking. They need to deal with individuals rather than the whole class.
I think like someone who like helps you be involved in the lessons and does like really active things, so it helps you remember it.
I'd say definitely the ability to inspire children and teenagers and everything. Like if they're really passionate about the subject, then that's important, but also knowing how to relate it to the context of their pupils' lives. That's very important, because if it's not in the right context, then you really don't know how it relates to your life, and it makes it seem a bit pointless learning it.
First thing that comes to my head, I'd say, is the ability to communicate with the class. Because I find my favourite teachers are ones who can teach well, but the ones who are able to communicate it to the class. And it's not just being serious all the time. You can have a bit of fun, but the main thing is what they've got for the lesson planned, they get across to you, you remember it, and that's fine. Because I have some teachers who really know their stuff, but they're not able to sort of teach it to the children as well, because it doesn't sink in. So I think that the best thing for a teacher to do is to be able to communicate with the students.
I think consistency, because it's like even if you are strict, then it's like if the students or whatever, if they know where they stand, then they're more likely to do what you want.
I think they've got to be like approachable. Like if you have a problem, then you can easily like go to them and like they can help you sort it out. And they've got to be firm, but then again they've basically got to be like a big kid, but they've got to be like firm.
If you can't talk to them and have a bit of a laugh with them as well as learning, then it kind of takes the fun out of it. And you need to have the balance right between being able to relate to the students and talk to them about everyday things, but also having their respect as well, kind of knowing where to draw the line.
A good teacher is someone who listens a lot to you and responds to what you say. They don't just ignore you, and they like take you in completely, and they're like there for you all the time.
It's a hard job, isn't it?
Yeah.
This module is what makes a good teacher. Well, it has to start somewhere. And it really all begins with you. If you're watching these lectures and trying to go through to achieve a goal of becoming a teacher, the first thing that you most likely had to ask yourself is if you had the right personality to be a teacher. The personality of a teacher really needs to be kind and patient. because you're showing someone for the very first time something that they have either very little exposure to or no exposure to at all. So patience is really a very important personality trait that you need to have. And of course, with that comes kindness. The second trait that you have to have is that you have to love to teach. If you don't love this job, you're not going to enjoy it, and you're going to adversely affect the people that you teach. So you really need to love what you do in order to do it successfully. The third trait is that you have to have the ability to motivate students. If you don't have the ability to motivate students, then what are you doing? Because really that's what teaching is all about, is motivating our students to succeed, motivating our students to do beyond what we teach them in the classroom. And the fourth thing that is really kind of essential to teaching is that you need to be lively and entertaining in some way. If you're not lively and entertaining, you have a really boring class, you're putting people to sleep, and they're not learning. So being lively and entertaining without going too overboard with the entertaining part, this is all very important. So altogether, kind and patient, you have to love to teach, you have to have the ability to motivate your students, and you need to be lively and entertaining. Okay. The next thing that we need to talk about is developing the relationship between the teacher and the student. Because there has to be a relationship. In order for a student to learn from you, they need to be able to trust you. They need to be able to understand that what you say is true. And this has to do with the trust issue as well. So really what you should do as a teacher is that you have to be knowledgeable of the material that you are teaching. No matter what it is, you have to be knowledgeable. Okay? Because if you try to tell a student something and you're wrong, and they recognize that you're wrong, you will not only look foolish, trust, and once you lose those, it's very, very difficult to get them back. Next is that you have to establish good rapport and interaction with the class. Not just with individual students, of course that's important, but with the entire class. Good rapport means that you have open communication back and forth between you and your class. Next, you have to have the ability to involve all students equally. This means that you don't look at just one particular student all the time. You don't have a teacher's pet. This is forbidden. You have to involve all of the students equally. Some students will not want to participate, and when you encounter that, well, you can deal with that differently. We'll talk about that in a later module, but you need to attempt to involve all of your students equally. Now, you also have to have the ability to correct your students without offending them. Remember that if you're teaching English as a second language and you're doing it in someone else's country, their customs may be different from yours. So it's very important that you understand the customs and the traditions and certain roles of male and female in the country that you're teaching, as well as different ways that you can correct someone without offending them. Because if you offend someone, you're not just offending that person in the class when you're correcting them, you're offending everyone in the class and maybe even in their entire village, and you will lose it. You'll lose your job, you'll lose respect, you'll lose everything, and you will find yourself having to move. So make sure you understand the customs and traditions of wherever you're teaching. And finally, you need to recognize your students' weaknesses and help them individually, even after class if necessary. A lot of times some of these centers, schools will not pay you overtime, but a truly dedicated teacher will take the time to spend with their students, even if they're not being paid for it. Okay, so keep that in mind. And this actually will help to increase the relationship between you and your students. And if you spend just that little bit of extra time with your student after class if they need it, They will respect you immensely for this, and they will try harder, and you will see marked change within their studies and their abilities. Okay, keep that in mind. Now, as a teacher, we fill many different roles. We're not just teachers. We fill many different roles in the career of teaching. Okay. Now, those roles, some of these roles are role model, manager, controller, organizer, assessor, prompter, participant, and observer. These are just guidelines. They don't include all of the roles that you will find yourself in, and sometimes you won't be in one or two of the roles, but for the most part, as a guide, these are the roles that you'll find yourself in as a teacher at various points. Now, as far as being a role model, remember that you represent the school and your profession, and that's the most important part. You represent your profession, whether you're teaching or not. So even when you're not in the classroom, you are being observed by your students in one way or another. This could even include things that you do on Facebook. Facebook has become the #1 phenomenon in the world as far as linking people together, and we always have a tendency of sharing our Facebook page with all of our students and everyone else in the world that wants to be our Facebook friend. Well, I'm here to let you know that if you do have Facebook and you get into these social networks online, whatever it may be, LinkedIn, or maybe you use a different one, it doesn't matter. The point is that if you have these and you want your students to participate with you in these social networks, you should have one for your friends and family, and you should have one as a teacher, so that your students see only the teacher one, so that when you have certain interactions on your Facebook page, it's professional, and they see you and always are able to respect you in the role that you are playing as a teacher. Okay? They won't see all of the other stuff that maybe your crazy cousin does or whatever. Okay? So please keep that in mind. And you need to speak and act properly at all times. This includes many different actions that you may think are fun. If one of your students sees you doing something that may not be culturally appropriate, depending on where you are, well, you need to keep that in mind, that they may lose respect for you. In addition to this, in the classroom, if you don't know the answer to a question, you should not try to bluff. Because if you bluff and they realize that you're not telling them the truth, or that you're just trying to wing it, they may recognize this, and if they do, you've lost it. You've lost their respect, you've lost their trust, and again, you may not get it back. It's just better to say, hey, if you don't know, you don't know. If you have internet in your classroom, look it up. Look it up immediately. Google is a fascinating little search engine. All you have to do is type a word in, and all sorts of stuff comes up. If it's a difficult question to find an answer to right away, well, you're going to have to just say, I don't really know the answer to that right now, but let me check, and I will get back to you. In the meantime, if everyone else in the classroom would like to also look it up, we can share notes in the next class, and we can talk about it and have an extra part about this in our next class. So you can actually turn it into something fun and exciting, as well as a learning experience for everyone in your classroom. So use the opportunities that are before you. Okay? So the next one is the manager-controller. In this management position, you need to make sure that things are managed, obviously, in the right way. That starts with making sure that your classroom is neat and in an orderly fashion. A lot of times this will ensure that you can obtain and maintain the respect of your students on an ongoing basis. If they come into a classroom that's messy, They may, this goes back to the role model aspect, where they may think poorly of you because of this. You never know. It's just better and safer to keep a neat and orderly classroom. And the next thing that you need to consider as a manager is that you need to manage the tasks that are taking place. Whatever the activity may be in the classroom, well, you're the manager of it. You make sure that from the beginning to the end and to the feedback session on the activity, everything is managed properly. And we'll talk more about that as far as running activities in one of the future modules. Now, as far as the organizer goes, it's fairly simple to understand that as an organizer, you organize the activity, whatever the activity may be. With this, you also put the students into their groups or their pairs, you initiate the activity, you close the activity, and you organize feedback. This kind of duplicates a little bit the management aspect, but as an organizer, it's more hands-on. Okay, you're doing every tiny little aspect of what has to happen within the activity. All right, and then as the assessor, of course, you need to evaluate what is happening. You're evaluating your students, you're evaluating yourself, you're evaluating the activity. You're constantly evaluating and assessing everything that is happening in your classroom in order to make sure that everything is running smoothly and properly. Now, as the assessor, you provide feedback and correction to your students. This is one of the assessment responsibilities that you have. When you do this, you must be fair, and you must be consistent, you must be sensitive, and you must provide proper direction and support. Now, as far as being fair, that should be pretty standard. We all kind of understand what being fair means. So always try to think what would be fair to you. If you were in the other person's shoes, if you were the one that was receiving any sort of feedback and correction, would you accept it the way that you're giving it? Okay. Secondly, as far as consistency goes, this means that you have to make sure that when you correct someone of, say, lower class, you correct someone of maybe an upper class in the same manner. Same goes with male and female. You correct consistently. You provide this feedback consistently. You don't favor anyone over the other. Okay? Because when you do that, if you show that you're showing some sort of favoritism to one person or another, it really can affect the abilities of everyone else to respect you and to keep going in your classroom. Now, of course, being sensitive, this goes with being kind and patient earlier. Just be sensitive. Of course, it doesn't mean to be crying over spilled milk or anything, but be sensitive to the needs and the abilities of the people that you're teaching. And as far as providing proper direction and support, of course, if you're going to point them to certain websites, etc., make sure that you have researched those sites previously. You know exactly what you're giving them. If you're giving them extra homework, make sure that it's relevant, that sort of thing. Okay. Now, as far as a prompter, your students are going to get stuck. They're students. Okay? So when they get stuck, you don't give them the answer. Giving them the answer is what we call spoon feeding them. If you spoon feed your students, they're going to get used to it and they're not going to learn. A good teacher will always try to develop his or her students' ability to study on their own and to come up with the answers on their own. So you never give the answers. What you should do, however, is to give hints. You give clues. You give one word, or you give syllables, or little tiny bits of information in order to get the student to respond. You will see, if you pay attention to your students, you'll see within their eyes and on their foreheads and even on their noses, when they crinkle their noses in certain ways, you will see their facial expressions and you will know that they've just about got it. And when you recognize that they have just about gotten and they're about to say something, stop. Stop what you're trying to do. Stop giving them clues and wait for the response. Now, of course, there does come a time within this time frame that enough is enough. You don't want to carry it on too far. Most of the time, prompting should only take 10 to 15 seconds. So it's a very short period of time. Because remember, you have a whole class to teach. You're not teaching just one person. So there comes a time when you will have to stop giving clues if they're not getting it and just ask someone else who can help. Okay. So who else in the classroom knows the answer? Okay. Who can help the student over here? Okay, whatever their name may be. And of course, call them by name. We'll talk about that later also. Okay. Now, sometimes you're going to be a participant. Especially if you put students in groups. If you're putting all of your students in particular groups, 2s and 3s perhaps, there may be an odd number out and you may have to end up joining in. Now if you do this, you're going to make sure that you don't dominate that particular group. Become just that, a participant, not a teacher anymore. Let the rest of the group run the activity and you just do the little parts. Okay? Don't let the attention come to you. Don't let all the questions come to you. If someone within the group starts asking you a lot of questions, you put the questions back on them and say, well, I don't know. I'm just a participant. What do you think? Okay? So when you become a participant, you can choose to do this also, and really becomes rather fun for a teacher from time to time to do this. You don't have to wait until there's an odd number of people for group matching. You can actually set it up like this and join different groups and different activities because the students a lot of times really enjoy this as well. So, okay, now as an observer, observing is one of the key elements of our job. All good teachers will be excellent observers. Now, as an observer, you're going to want to maintain a certain distance. It doesn't mean to stand outside the room, of course. It means to stand back and simply observe what is happening. You want to allow your students to do the activities on their own. You're going to take mental notes as you're walking around the classroom, perhaps. You're not going to walk around with a pen and a pad of paper and taking notes as you pass your students, because they're going to disregard the activity and pay more attention to what you're doing. So you take mental notes. Okay, and then when you get back up to your teaching station, whether it be a desk or a podium or whatever, you will jot down a few notes so that you don't forget some things that you want to talk about at the end of the activity. Now also during the observer role, you will act only as a resource, and you will answer questions if you are asked. In this, you don't want to give too much. You want to go back to that prompting role, and when you're answering the questions, you want to be helpful and available, but not overbearing and not dominant. Your main job as an observer is to do just that: observe what is happening and evaluate, and never ever give too much while you're doing this. The activity is for the students and for you to observe what is happening. Okay? So now that we've talked about the roles and qualities of being a good teacher, first of all, having the right personality, and then trying to fulfill some of these roles, let's talk about a few of the qualities that make a good student. The longer we teach, the more we recognize the good qualities within students. And the key element here is that as we recognize these good qualities, we begin to develop these good qualities in all of our other students, so that we don't just focus on that one student who has all of these good qualities. We help all of our students develop these good qualities. So what are some of these good qualities? Well, the first thing, of course, is willingness to listen. A student who is willing to listen, obviously, is going to be able to absorb what you're teaching them. You can't really teach a student who doesn't have a willingness to listen. If they're sitting there playing on their cell phone or texting or doing things in workbooks or writing letters to friends or whatever, they're not listening to your lecture, the lecture part of your lesson, well, that could be a major problem. So you need to figure out why they're not listening during the lesson and get that sorted out as quickly as possible. Now, the second thing for a language student in particular is their desire to experiment. As you teach more classes, you will see that the students who achieve more will make more mistakes. And this is because they are experimenting with the language. They will try different things because they're using the brains to try to figure out how to communicate effectively. So they'll make more mistakes, but they're going to experiment a lot more. That's why they're making mistakes. Now, this also goes with willingness to ask questions. Now, you'll have a few students from time to time who will ask you so many questions that it will slow the class down. Those students you're going to have to try to deal with, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But for the most part, a willingness to ask questions shows, obviously, that they have a willingness to learn. So good students normally will ask questions, at least maybe 1 or 2 questions per session. Now, good students, of course, they will have the obvious quality of having the ability to think for themselves. Remember, as a teacher, you're not just developing what's happening in the classroom, you're developing their ability to think for themselves and to develop further outside the classroom. Because the classroom environment is only one tool in their education. The real tools come with whatever they do outside the classroom. So you provide them with a little bit of what they need, some materials and tools, and then allow them to go about continuing their education when they leave the classroom. And of course, the ability to think for themselves plays a major part in that. Now, a good student will also accept error correction. Occasionally, you will have a student who does not accept error correction very well. They may become a little stubborn. They may not like your answer. However, if you are right, you are right. And if you are right, there can be no argument. Truth is truth. Fact is fact. Arguments are nonsense. So make sure that you're right. And if the student does not want to accept the correction when you are right, then they essentially are demonstrating for you that they do not have one of the good qualities that it takes to become a good student. So you need to try to develop that by being kind and patient, in particular with that student, to help them get through that barrier and to be able to accept error correction. There's many different reasons why a student will not accept error correction. Kindness and patience will help you to get through that barrier, hopefully. And we'll talk more about that later on in another module also. Now, last but not least, of course, is the desire to learn. A student who has a desire to learn is really in the right place. It all really begins with that. If they have a desire to learn, they have all these other qualities and the desire to learn, well, they're going to learn something. So even though we list desire to learn last on this particular, in these qualities, it doesn't mean that it's last. In fact, it's probably the number one thing. So, because if they have a desire to learn, all of these other things will fall into line. And they will learn something. Okay, so it all begins there. Now, if they have the desire to learn and they can't do it for whatever reason, figure out why through some of the other methods that will be taught to you, and you will get them where they want to be in their language studies. So really, is a teacher responsible for these qualities? Well, yeah, they really are. The successful teacher will be able to recognize and foster these good qualities in a student and encourage their development. A successful teacher will also recognize the weak areas of a student and help the student develop them. So recognize when your students have these good qualities and foster them and keep them strong, and recognize their weaknesses and bring those weaknesses and turn those weaknesses into strengths. Not only will your students be thankful, but other teachers later on will be thankful because they will have received from you good students. Now, as far as the age of students goes, as TEFL teachers, or as EFL or ESL or ESOL or any of the other acronyms for teaching English goes, for teaching English as a second language or foreign language, we teach students of all ages. We teach them from 4 or 5 years old all the way up to 110 if they so desire. The very young and the very old are not very common, but it does happen. So you need to recognize that teaching in our career field is ageless. However, you should realize that most students, most English language students, will come to you because either their parents want them to or they want to. And there's a little bit of difference between those two groups. If your students are coming to you because their parents want them to, they may not be as motivated as the ones who are coming to you because they want to come to you. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but for the most part, everyone coming to us is coming to us with a certain degree of self-motivation to begin with. Most of our students will be college students or business professionals or older teenagers, because this is the age group that language development is really taking hold, because they realize and recognize that what they do in the future and in the immediate future really is a result of what they do now. So a lot of students will be in the late teen to early 30s. One last point to keep in mind here is that you don't have to teach anyone who does not want to learn. If a student comes to you and for whatever reason they just want to give you a hard time and they're not actually there to learn, but they're there for whatever other reason, maybe in their minds, you don't have to teach them. Okay? As an English teacher in our career, working for centers, you have the ability to say, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to leave the classroom today and come back on at another time. Now, that is going to the extreme, and we'll talk more in depth about discipline and student corrections later on, but I just wanted to make a point here that you're not forced into this. Okay? Teaching English as a second language or as a foreign language is not an indentured servant status. You don't have to do it. So if someone is coming to you and they're just really difficult to teach, which we will talk about later, you don't have to teach them. Okay? Now there are other factors that affect the teaching environment. Of course, we talked about the age of students already, but we also have the experience of students, the motivation of students, nervousness, language awareness, and behavior. So let's talk about those a little bit more. What does the age of the majority of your students indicate? Well, we've already said this. Most ESL students are going to be self-motivated. They have a career at hand. They have a university degree that they're going after. Whatever reason, they need this English. So they're trying to get the best they can get out of all of your sessions. So they're already self-motivated. And that makes our job quite a lot easier, actually. So, and it makes it rather enjoyable as well. So there's nothing worse than having to teach a group or a classroom full of people who don't want to be there. Trust me on that. And it can be the most excruciating event in your life. Now, as far as learning experience, a couple things to remember is that older students will have a history of success and failure in their experiences, in their learning experiences. And they'll be a bit more cautious. In other words, they may not experiment very often in class. They will be the quiet bunch, if there is such a thing. So you need to try to coax them into speaking more in the classroom. But don't worry, they're studying though. When they go home, they really hit the books. They're doing the best that they can to apply what they learned in classroom. So, older students may not experiment so much, but they will study. However, younger students, they're not going to study, but they're going to experiment a lot. So if you have a classroom mixture of students with older and younger, you will see the difference firsthand. You will see how the younger students hardly ever have their homework done, but yet they're always trying to talk in class. The older students hardly ever talk in class, but they always have their homework done. Believe me, it happens all the time. And when you see it, you'll say, ah, my teacher was right. Okay. Now, motivation. When it comes to motivation, some students obviously will be more motivated than others. It's just a fact of life. Business professionals are very motivated. There's money on the line. They have to do this, so they're very motivated to understand and speak English as just like a native speaker. However, high school students are not very motivated just because of the things that they're involved in. They don't want to study anything. So don't take it personal. It's just the way that it is. So developing more classroom-style activities for high school students is the best way to deal with that. You already know they're not going to do homework, so give them very little to do. Now, reasons for motivation. One thing that I've already mentioned was the career. Other motivational reasons are obviously travel. Somebody wants to travel to an English-speaking country, so they need to learn English in order to do so. Some people want to improve their grades or do well on any of the exams. Maybe they have just an English exam in their school or in their university, or they want to take one of the English proficiency exams, such as the TOEFL or IELTS. They may want to live or study in a foreign country. They may want to immigrate to Australia or New Zealand or America or UK or Canada even. Okay. They may want to simply communicate better with their friends and or colleagues. Some of our students at the language train, for instance, are doctors, and they want to take classes because they go to international conferences and everyone else there is speaking in English. Well, they know English because they study it at the university in all their books, but they don't know how to speak English. They know English when they see it, and when they hear it, sometimes they can get a little confused, but speaking it is a real problem because they're just not used to forming the words. So that will be one of the reasons why they come to you. And some people, for whatever reason, are just simply interested in languages. For instance, I had a student not too long ago who spoke Japanese, Russian, French, Arabic, Spanish, Korean, and was taking English classes. Absolute fascinating individual. She was, of course, one of my star students, and she had an American accent of all things. It was incredible. Now, something else we need to talk about is maybe the students' language awareness. When our students come to us, they have a certain level of language awareness already. They've had some level of pre-exposure to the language. So, but others will not have, it's a varying degree. Some will have a lot of exposure, others won't have so much. So at the lower levels, a lot of students will always want to translate words from English into their native language. When levels, it may be okay because they don't really have a base to build on or a foundation to build on. But when you get to the intermediate to advanced levels, translation needs to stop because they know enough English to be able to define words, not translate them. Translations never really give us exact meanings. Sometimes they do, but not always. Definitions in the native language or in the language that you're using are obviously much better, as long as the definition is understood. So be aware that depending on the level you're teaching, some of your students may always want to translate the words. So what you're going to want to do is only translate when necessary, and for the most part try to always define. When they can't get it because of definition, then you can resort back to what we call grammar translation, which we will talk about in the methods, mistakes, and feedback session. Okay? Now sometimes you're going to have behavior problems. It happens. I'm not going to try to sugarcoat anything. Once in a while, you're going to have behavioral problems in your classroom. But we need to consider why it's happening. Because a good teacher will look at the root cause of things rather than the behavior itself. Okay, so some things to keep in mind concerning behavior problems is that some of our students, some language students, come to class after either being in school all day or being at work all day. Because most English as a second language or English as a foreign language classes occur in the evenings. So they've worked all day, they've studied all day, or whatever they've done all day long, and by the time they get to you, they're tired. So once in a while, you may have a student that puts his or her head down. When they do this, they're not trying to offend you. They're just tired. Okay? Sometimes a student will be a little cranky, be a little upset, be a little on edge. Are they doing this because of you? Or are they doing it because they're tired or they have something else on their mind? For whatever reason, they're there, they've at least shown up to your class, and if they're exhibiting some sort of behavior problem during that one class, you may have to just let it slide. Being kind and patient is key to your success. Remember this. So exhibiting some kindness and patience to that one person who may be exhibiting some sort of personal malfunction that day for whatever reason may go a long way. So, and as teachers of English as a foreign language or second language, we must only discipline students if they're affecting the rest of the class. Remember, we're not teaching for a huge institution that that dictates governmental policy or any of these other things. Whether or not that student passes or fails your class may not change what happens in their future. So the level of discipline really needs to be minimal. We need to just make sure that the rest of the class is not being affected. And we'll talk more in depth about behavior problems and the proper amount of discipline to exercise in our classrooms in one of the future modules. But at this point, just realize that number one, find out the root cause if possible. Secondly, be kind and patient with them. And third, only demonstrate discipline or only instill discipline if it's absolutely necessary. Okay? So, when it comes right down to it, to sum it up, being a good teacher is a process. Okay? It isn't just, bam, I'm a good teacher. A good teacher and becoming a good teacher is a process. First, to be a good teacher, you have to realize that you have the right personality to be a teacher. If you realize or recognize that you have this personality to be a good teacher, then you can go on to understand how and work toward developing successful relationships with students by learning, understanding, and developing all the roles they need you to fulfill. Okay, that goes back to all those roles we talked about. And remember, the one that I think is the most important is the role model. Because if you demonstrate a good role model position, you're acting professionally at all times, and you demonstrate to them a good character, they're going to learn more from you than just language. Next, after this, after you've established good rapport with your students and demonstrate good qualities to them, you can recognize and develop good qualities for good students. Okay, working on strengths and weaknesses. Okay, after that, you can understand and recognize and utilize all the various environmental factors that we have talked about and that are involved in teaching successfully. Okay? So really, when it comes right down to it, as far as we're concerned, what makes a good teacher? Well, a good teacher is someone who encourages a good student to return for more. Okay? And it doesn't matter which company you work for, what school or whatever. What is meant by that is a good student keeps learning regardless of who's teaching them. Okay? A good student keeps coming back for more. So a good teacher fosters within their students their ability to keep learning regardless who's teaching them. Thank you very much for spending this time with me. This has been a presentation of the language training. Thank you. Bye-bye.